Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. So today I am back to do another book haul revisit where I look at the previous year's book haul and try to hold myself accountable and see, did I actually read all of those books that I bought? And I feel like in previous book haul revisits I have been fairly successful, even some where I've managed to read every single book in the 12-month period. Today is not one of those days because in this video I am looking back at my 2023 birthday book haul, and I don't know what it is around my birthday month where something crazy just takes hold of my brain. I suddenly want to buy everything that I see, regardless of whether or not I actually plan on reading it anytime soon, or whether it actually makes sense with my reading taste. I don't know what happens. Birthday time is just consumerism of booktube at its finest, because I'm just like, no, it's fine, it's for the birthday book haul, it's all good. It's not all good, Charlotte, stop doing this. So there are 17 books to go through today. Did I read them all? Let's see. So actually starting off, we're not doing too bad. The first book was The Once and Future Sex by Eleanor. This is medieval history looking at the lives of women, and I did read this one. I read it for History-a-thon of 2023. I will link down below the video where I talk about it. I really enjoyed this medieval history. It's the same author who wrote the text for the graphic novel The Middle Ages: A Graphic History, so I was very excited when I saw that she had a new book out. Another great history that I did end up reading was Uproar by Alice Loxton. I have waxed lyrical about how fantastic this history is, looking at Georgian London and the print culture, particularly looking at the prints of James Gilray, Isaac Cruikshank and Thomas Rowlandson. Once again, another review video that I have in depth on that below. But then we get to Blood Sisters by Sarah Gristwood. This was one that I picked up in a charity shop in March when we went down to London. This is a history of the women who were very prominent during the Wars of the Roses. I think I picked this up because I'd read things like Cecily by Annie Garthwaite and Elizabeth of York, The Last White Rose by Alison Weir. So I was on a bit of a kick with the Wars of the Roses and the women surrounding that war. And yeah, no, I haven't. And I think one of the reasons that I ended up not picking this up is because I read the introduction and I realised that this book was written or published around the summer of 2012. And in the book, she is discussing the rumours circulating that discovery of Richard III's bones might be on the horizon. We don't know. There's a bit of speculation that people know where it is, but we don't know for sure. And knowing that this book was being published within months of that discovery just kind of took me out of the book. And it's not Sarah Gristwood's fault at all. I'm sure her history is great, but for some reason it just clouded my brain while I was reading, because all I could think was, the bones are there. The bones are right there in Leicester. Go get them. I don't know what that was about. It's not Sarah Gristwood's fault. I like her writing. I'm sure this is great. I just need to push through this book. Bit of a silly reason, and it's not her fault. The next book that I picked up was Medusa by Jessie Burton, which I did read in May or June of 2023. I actually reviewed this along with Stoneblind by Natalie Haynes in a duo Medusa retelling roundup. This one is written with a YA audience in mind rather than the adult audience intended for Stoneblind, and it is a really interesting depiction of Medusa. I would say I would slightly give the edge to Natalie Haynes, but this was definitely enjoyable and definitely a more empowering take on Medusa. The next book is Hidden Figures by Margot Shetterley. This was one that I read straight away for History-a-thon, looking at the lives of the black women who worked for NASA, calculating their trajectories, helping NASA to get its astronauts into space. I had seen the film, of course, but this was the first time reading the book. Definitely some discrepancies between the film, which obviously makes everything more of a narrative, more cinematic. It was very interesting to get to see what things actually went down and when. Timelines are definitely condensed in the film, and that was interesting to see. The next book that I picked up for my birthday book haul was The Child That Book's Built by Frances Spufford. This is one that I actually have since unhauled and I sent to Rasheen over at Rasheen's Reading. I do like a book about books, but I do tend to have a harder time with memoirs. And I think probably what was getting in my way was I was thinking a lot about Bookworm by Lucy Mangan, which was a book that is also about childhood reading, and I just did not get on with. For me, I feel like there is a little bit of a disconnect when it's children's books that I don't know anything about. I think I prefer a more general story about reading and the author's relationship to it. Then next we have Bringing Down the Duke by Evie Dunmore, which is a romance set in the Victorian period with a bit of a suffragist twist. This was sent to me by the lovely Shah over at Thoroughly Enjoyed Books for my birthday. Sadly, a romance that I didn't quite get on with. I love the concept of this being a suffragist romance, but unfortunately they just didn't sustain that narrative anywhere near as much as I would have liked throughout. I didn't think the love interest was really that great. Honestly, I didn't really see what she saw in him aside from being hot and rich, which, you know, can work for some people, doesn't work for me. Then we have Hidden Hands by Mary Wellersley, which is a history of manuscripts and the people who created them and would copy text down, particularly looking at marginalia and other evidence for how we can tell who was actually creating these works. One that I did read, I was very excited for this one, and it is an interesting subject, but one that I didn't find quite as compelling as other medieval histories that I've read. I also picked up a couple of biographies. Firstly, Elizabeth Gaskell by Jenny Uglow. I actually picked this up in the Elizabeth Gaskell Gaskell House Museum in Manchester. Bit of a chunky thing, but I did end up finishing that, I think, in September or October when I was really trying to whittle down my TBR. This was one of the last books that I had to read, and this was really interesting. It gave me a lot more appreciation for Elizabeth Gaskell, and particularly how she crafts her characters, because this is an author who is such a people person, loves getting to know people, and it really comes across, I think, in her books now. I also picked up and read The Lonely Empress by Joan Haslipp, which is a biography of Elizabeth of Austria. This was one that I read, I believe, in August, September. Quite an anticipated book for me, and definitely was interesting, but I did find it a little bit dry. Another spur of the moment birthday purchase was One More Croissant for the Road by Felicity Cloake, which I did end up reading, I believe, in April, May time, and then very quickly read Red Sauce, Brown Sauce by the same author. This is her cycling around France and trying all of their cuisine, and particularly everywhere that she goes she will buy a croissant to work out who makes the perfect French croissant. This was really good fun, bit of a palate cleanser, especially because I was starting to ride my bike to and from work. I felt like slightly I could relate to this author, even though I was struggling to cycle 2 miles to and from work and she was doing like 30 miles in a day. I could definitely understand why she'd want a croissant at the end of all of that. This book also gave me such a hankering for French onion soup. Pretty powerful stuff. Oh, a really fantastic book that I picked up on my birthday book haul was Why We Sing by Julia Hollander. There's really great part memoir, part science behind singing, going from birth to death, the reasons why we do it, the benefits behind it, the science behind it, and it is such an interesting book. You are kind of preaching to the converted with me. I do love to sing. I'm in musical theatre society. You don't have to convince me of the merits of singing, but it was definitely appreciated. I really enjoyed this book. Then next we have Read A Natural History of the Redhead by Jacky, Colliss, Harvey. This was a book that I picked up because I'd seen it floating around, thought it was really interesting. As it says on the tin, it is a history of the Redhead in culture and in history and art. It's one that I do still have on my TBR, but I haven't picked up, and I don't know if I just want to hold on to it as a reference book rather than something that I read cover to cover, because I do think it's an interesting concept. It just hasn't really called to me. Then I picked up a little essay collection, When I Dare to Be Powerful by Audre Lorde, another one that I read for History-a-thon, though I don't think necessarily suited the format of reading for History-a-thon. I think this is an essay collection to kind of sit down with and pore over rather than reading in a bit of a rush for a readathon. Then from the Bronte Parsonage I picked up Charlotte and Arthur by Pauline Clooney. This is one I still haven't read, but is looking at Charlotte Bronte and her later life and when she married her husband Arthur Bell Nicholls. By this point Emily, Anne and Branwell have all died. I feel like it is potentially going to be less about her writing, and I wonder if that is why I haven't quite plucked up the motivation to pick this up yet. I'm sure it's great. I am still holding on to it, and also it's a Bronte book. I want to read it. The penultimate book from this birthday book haul was On This Day in History by Dan Snow. This is one that I picked up because I was at Oxford Literary Festival last year. I went to an event with both him and Alice Loxton talking about the relevance of studying history, how public history particularly has changed with the rise of social media, Alice Loxton being very big on Instagram and TikTok, Dan Snow conversely having become big in history circles through his documentaries and through his podcasts, how we work with these different mediums to get the same result, which is getting more people involved and interested in history. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I picked this book up because I felt bad about the fact that I had Alice Loxton's book and not Dan Snow's, and yeah, I was going up to get the book signed. So I kind of picked this up out of guilt, kind of knowing that I probably wasn't going to end up reading this cover to cover. It's a very interesting concept and maybe one day I will, but it's one of those historical event a day kind of books. So you would flick to whatever day this is, like today it's the 29th of March, flick to its corresponding page and be like, oh, on this day in 1856 this happened. And I like the concept, I'm just probably not gonna read it cover to cover. I am notoriously bad with like poem-a-days, page-a-days. I can't even keep a diary. So I do think this is a very good way into history for people, but maybe not one that I'm actually gonna read. Sorry, Dan. And then the final book that I picked up right at the end of March was The Secrets of Heartwood Hall by Katie Lumsden. I picked this up at her book launch, which was such a fantastic experience. And I did actually read this one, though I read it a little bit late. I read it a few months after the book launch. Honestly, purely because I was terrified. I know that me and Katie have very different taste in historical fiction. We both love historical fiction, but we tend to read different time periods, and I think different interests when it comes to plot and writing style. And so yeah, I was a little bit nervous, and I think Katie was a bit nervous as well, to see if I would like the book. I read it in June do know I want to say, and oh, it was one of my favourite books of last year. I am very much looking forward to the next book, The Trouble with Miss Montgomery Hurst. It was such a great book. If you love historical fiction, if you are a fan of the Brontes, then you definitely need to read this because it is just such a lovely tribute to the Brontes as well as being its own great story. But there we go, those are all of the books that I picked up in March of last year. Out of the 17, I read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, so not as bad as I thought. I read 12. I haven't read 5. One of them I sent away. One of them I'm not sure I'm ever going to pick up. But yeah, 12 to 5. Not too bad. Not as bad as I thought it was going to be, but I still feel like it's a lot of books to then not read over the span of 12 months. Like, there is no reason I couldn't have read these books. Do let me know if you've read any of the books that I've spoken about today. Alternatively, let me know about anything you've picked up recently and really loved. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.